That's the sound of a big deal. At Wayfair, that sound happens a lot. Dream sofa for half the price? Big deal. New dining table you've been eyeing for months? Big deal. Finally picking up those last few pieces and finishing that bedroom? Now that's a really big deal. Whatever your home needs, Wayfair has the selection, the savings, and over millions of 5-star reviews to back it up. Shop Wayfair.com today before someone else snags your big deal.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
What if we treated every human action and interaction the same way? Every meeting, every conversation, every room that we enter, what if we asked, how can I leave this space better than I found it? Because the world rarely changes because of dramatic speeches. It changes because of quiet decisions made in ordinary moments. A decision not to laugh, a decision to ask a question, a decision to protect someone who isn't present, a decision to align your actions with your values.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govind Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govind Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 348, and another in my Edge of the Napkin series. If this is your first time joining us, Paper Napkin Wisdom is a podcast where leaders, entrepreneurs, and difference makers share simple ideas that shape their lives and businesses, often captured on something as simple as a plain paper napkin. Because sometimes the most powerful ideas, the ones that truly change how we think and live, start small. And sometimes they start with a question. And today's episode is another in the Edge of the Napkin series, where I take a moment to explore a single idea that sits right at the boundary between reflection and action, the place where insight becomes something more, something lived. And the question that sits at today's center is one that many of us think about, but far few of us answer clearly, which is, what do you stand for? Now, that might sound simple at first, but when you sit with it for a moment, you might begin to notice that the real challenge isn't the idea of standing for something. The real challenge is recognizing those moments when life quietly asks you to actually do it. Those moments in conversations or in meetings, in rooms where something is said that doesn't quite sit right. Sometimes people brush those moments off. But if you pay attention, you might begin to notice that something inside you registers those moments long before your mind has time to even explain them. And that raises an interesting probability or possibility. What if that quiet feeling is actually pointing to something important, something about your values or boundaries or limits, and perhaps even the kind of world you want to shape? Throughout history, the people who moved humanity forward often started with something surprisingly simple, an idea, a dream, a belief in a world that didn't yet exist, and somehow they found the courage to stand for it before they could fully see it. So, in today's conversation, we're going to explore what that really could mean to know what you stand for, how those moments show up in everyday life, and the way we stand for something might just matter as much as the stand itself. Because sometimes the quiet decisions we make in ordinary rooms become the moments that shape something much bigger. So, let's dive in. There are moments in life that ask a very simple question. Not a complicated one, not a technical one, not a strategic one, just a simple question. What do you stand for? And the truth is, most people don't have a clear answer. Not because they're bad people, but because they've never stopped long enough to think about it. We live in a world full of opinions. Everyone has a take, everyone has a platform, everyone has a voice. But something strange happened along the way. We have more voices than ever, but less clarity than ever. Because when the moment comes, and I mean the real moment, the moment when something is uncomfortable and is said out loud, something dismissive, maybe it's something cruel, something small, something that just doesn't feel right, most people do the same thing. They pause, they look around the room, and they stay quiet. And the quiet is fascinating because it's rarely malicious. Sometimes it's just discomfort. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's just the pressure of the room, and you know that moment. Someone says something that makes the energy shift. Maybe it's about race or gender. Maybe it's about someone who isn't there, or maybe worse, it's about someone who is there but doesn't have the power to push back. And that comment is pushed off as, just relax. It's locker room talk, or it's a joke, or you're taking it too seriously. But if you pay attention, there's always a moment in that exchange that something inside you says, that didn't feel right. And the problem is that many of us have learned to distrust that feeling. We override it. We rationalize it. We smooth it over. We laugh politely and we let the conversation move on because speaking up feels messy. It disrupts the flow. It risks social friction. It risks becoming the person that makes things awkward. But here's the deeper truth. Your intuition is one of the most sophisticated and ethical instruments you possess. It's the part of you that registers energy before language. It notices tone before logic. It senses harm before analysis. And yet, we've been trained or beaten down to ignore it. So let me tell you about a conversation I had recently. I was talking to a great friend of mine. He's someone to most people that appears white, but he isn't. And he told me something fascinating. Throughout his life, many times he's been in rooms where people assumed that he was safe. He was one of them. He was safe to say certain things around. He was safe to make certain comments around, safe to laugh with. And when the topic around race came up, which they sometimes did, people would say things that they would never say if they believed that someone different from them was listening. And he told me something that struck with me. He said, I shut it down immediately. No debate, no lecture, just boundary. A clear statement, a calm refusal to participate in that kind of conversation. And when he told me that, my first reaction was a thought of admiration, but my second thought was something deeper. Why should it take someone like him to shut it down? Why should it fall, the burden, that is, why should the burden fall to the person closest to harm? Why should it be the responsibility falling on one person who might be the one who might be most exposed? And if you look carefully at history, the moments that moved humanity forward were rarely driven by only the people who were directly harmed. They were driven by people who decided, even if this doesn't affect me personally, it violates something I stand for. Thomas Jefferson once wrote words that still echo across centuries. All men are created equal. Now, history will remind us that Jefferson himself did not live fully aligned with those words. But the power of them is undeniable. They created a standard, an idea that was larger than the man who wrote them. And once those words existed, humanity had something to measure itself against. Then, years later, across the ocean, a Russian writer named Leo Tolstoy began writing about the moral power of nonviolent resistance. He wrote about the idea that systems of injustice ultimately rely on the quiet cooperation of ordinary people, that injustice survives not because of tyrants, but because of silence. Tolstoy believed something powerful. If enough people refused to cooperate with injustice, the system would begin to crack. And his ideas traveled far beyond Russia. They eventually reached the ears and eyes of a young lawyer living in South Africa, a man named Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi took those ideas and turned them into something extraordinary, not an argument, not a debate, a movement built on a radical idea that firmness and compassion can exist at the same time, that resistance doesn't have to be violent to be powerful. And here's something powerful that people often forget about Gandhi. When he began, the outcome was far from obvious. India was under British rule, and at the time, British Empire was the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Military strength, economic reach, political influence across the globe. And here was this thin lawyer in simple clothing talking about salt marshes and a peaceful resistance. And if you were sitting in the room at the beginning, you might have said, this is never going to work. But Gandhi believed something before he could see it. He believed that moral courage could move systems that physical force could not. He believed that the disciplined nonviolence could even awaken the conscience of the world. And he acted from that belief long before the world believed it along with him. The ideas traveled again across oceans, across generations. They reached a young minister in the United States, Martin Luther King Jr. King studied Gandhi deeply, and he understood that nonviolent resistance wasn't weakness, it was moral strength organized into action. And then King stood in front of a nation deeply divided by race and injustice and said something that still echoes today, I have a dream. Think about that phrase for a moment, a dream. Not a guarantee, not a forecast, a dream. He spoke about children holding hands across racial lines. He spoke about justice rolling down like waters. He spoke about a country finally living up to its own promise. And here's the critical and fun part about this. When King said those words, he could not yet see that world. Segregation was still the law in many places. Violence was real, hatred was loud, and the dream was not yet visible. But King believed in it before he could see it. He believed it strongly enough to speak it, strongly enough to march for it, strongly enough to risk his life for it. And when people heard those words, I have a dream, something shifted. Because a dream, when spoken with conviction, becomes a mirror and invites everyone to ask themselves, do I believe this world is possible too? And those ideas traveled again to South Africa, to a man named Nelson Mandela. Mandela spent 27 years in prison. 27 years. Imagine losing nearly 3 decades of your life behind bars. And when he emerged, he did something extraordinary. He didn't call for revenge. He called for reconciliation, firmness and compassion at the same time. And if you look closely, there's a thread connecting Jefferson, Tolstoy, Gandhi, and King, Mandela, and many others. The thread is simple. They all ask the same question. What do we stand for? And then they ask the harder question. How will we stand for it? Standing for something doesn't mean shouting. It doesn't mean fighting. It doesn't mean humiliating others. In fact, the most powerful forms of standing often look very different. Sometimes standing means asking a question. Why would we say something like that? Sometimes standing means calmly saying, I'm not comfortable with that. Sometimes standing means refusing to laugh when everyone else does. Sometimes standing means changing the subject. Sometimes standing means defending someone who isn't present. Sometimes standing means pulling someone aside later and saying, hey, that comment didn't sit right with me. But before you can stand for anything, you have to know what matters to you. And that's where most people struggle, because we live in a world that encourages reaction more than reflection. We react to headlines, we react to social media, we react to sound bites, but very few people sit down and ask, what actually matters to me? What are my boundaries? What are my limits? What kind of world do I want to contribute to, and how will I do that? Without clarity, you will always default to the energy of the room. If the room laughs, you laugh. If the room stays silent, you stay silent. If the room shrugs, you shrug. But clarity changes everything. Because once you know what you stand for, the moment becomes simpler. Not easy, but simpler. Because instead of reacting to the room, you respond from your values. And here's something super important. Standing for something doesn't mean being perfect. Every one of us has moments where we look back and think, I should have said something. That's the part of being human. Goal isn't perfection. The goal is awareness and progress. Remember that Mohandas Gandhi's autobiography was titled My Experiments with the Truth. Standing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's incredibly quiet. A moment of calm, a moment of dignity, a moment of clarity. But those moments ripple. They ripple through conversations, they ripple through relationships, and they ripple through cultures across oceans. Because culture is not created by mission statements. Culture is created by what we tolerate. And culture changes when people begin to gently but firmly say, that's not who we are. But standing for something is not just about opposing what's wrong. It's about building what's right, standing for dignity, standing for kindness, standing for respect, standing for curiosity, and standing for fairness. Standing for the idea that every human being deserves to be treated with basic humanity across cultures, centuries, philosophies. The message keeps repeating. Across oceans, treat people the way you want to be treated, not as jokes, not as stereotypes, not as objects of convenience, but with human beings, as human beings with dignity. So let's come back to the original question. What do you stand for? Not what do you post about, not what do you say you believe, but what do you actually stand for when the moment arrives? When the room goes quiet, when the joke lands wrong, when someone feels dismissed, and when someone who isn't there becomes the target. What do you stand for then? And the second question is just important. How will you stand for it? Because the way we stand matters. Anger may feel powerful, but it rarely changes hearts. Humiliation may feel satisfying, but it rarely creates understanding. The model offered by Jefferson, Tolstoy, Gandhi, King, and Mandela is something deeper: firmness and compassion at the same time. Firmness meaning that you're clear about your boundaries. Compassion, remembering the humanity of the person in front of you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to invite someone to think. Think about the legacy you want to leave, not the resume, not the titles, the way people felt around you. Did you elevate the conversation? Did you protect the dignity of the person not in the room or was too weak to speak? Did you make spaces more thoughtful and more humane? There's a phrase I've always loved: leave the campsite better than you found it. When you leave a campsite, you clean it up. You leave it better for the next person. What if we treated every human action and interaction the same way? Every meeting, every conversation, every room that we enter, what if we asked, how can I leave this space better than I found it? Because the world rarely changes because of dramatic speeches. It changes because of quiet decisions made in ordinary moments. A decision not to laugh, a decision to ask a question, a decision to protect someone who isn't present, a decision to align your actions with your values. History is only written when presidents is not only written by presidents and revolutionaries, rather, it's written by millions of people in small moments. Moments where ordinary people decide, this is what I stand for, and this is how I will stand for it. So I invite you that the next time you feel that moment when the energy shifts, when the comment lands wrong, when silence spreads across the room, pause, notice the shift in your own physiology, take a breath, and listen to the voice inside you, the one that says, that didn't feel right. Because that voice is not your enemy, it is your compass. Then ask yourself one simple question: what do I stand for? And when you know the answer, stand. Not with anger, not with arrogance, but with calm conviction and compassion, with dignity. The quiet strength of someone who knows something powerful, that every moment is a chance to shape the world. And every one of us has the power to leave it just a little bit better than we found it. Make it a great day.